Find the derivative of y equals f of x divided by x squared plus 1. Then evaluate y prime of negative 1, where f of negative 1 is negative 6 and f prime of negative 1 is negative 2. Y here is the quotient of two functions, one of which is unknown, f of x, divided by one which is known, x squared plus 1. Since we have a quotient, the derivative will involve the quotient rule. Y prime, or dy dx, will equal to quotient rule, derivative of the numerator, f prime of x, times the denominator left alone, x squared plus 1, minus the numerator left alone, f of x, times the derivative of the denominator. Derivative of x squared will be, bring the 2 down, subtract 1 from it, 2x. The derivative of the 1 will be 0, so just 2x. All of this is divided by the denominator squared, so x squared plus 1, quantity squared. I'm going to take one more step just to rewrite, to make it look maybe a little nicer. I'll put the x squared plus 1 before the f prime of x, and the 2x before the f of x. I'll leave the denominator the way it is. And there's our derivative y prime, or dy dx. The next thing to do is to evaluate y prime of negative 1, which means to plug a negative 1 in for each of the x's. So we will have a negative 1 squared plus 1 times f prime of negative 1 minus 2 times negative 1 times f of negative 1, and this entire thing over negative 1 squared plus 1, and then the entire thing squared. Now in the numerator, negative 1 squared is 1, so we have 1 plus 1. F prime of negative 1, that can be found from the information over here. It looks like f prime of negative 1 is a negative 2. And then minus 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. And then times f of negative 1, which is found over there to be a negative 6. All over negative 1 squared, which is 1 plus 1, and then quantity squared. So in the numerator, 1 plus 1 is 2 times a negative 2, plus 2 times a negative 6, which is a negative 12, and then all over 1 plus 1, which is 2, squared. So y prime of negative 1 will equal, in the numerator, 2 times negative 2, that's a negative 4, minus 12, divided by 2 squared, which is a 4. So minus 4 minus 12, negative 16 divided by 4. We can reduce this by 4, and that will give us negative 4.